Hi, my name is Allison, and my video is meant to address some environmental issues that arise through agricultural practices. I chose to focus on three countries in this video: El Salvador, the United States, and Vietnam, because I wanted to talk about how different agricultural practices affect environments in various regions of the world. The information I got for the three countries will come from my friend Anna, who talks about El Salvador, my friend Jack, who talks about the United States, particularly in the Midwestern region, and my dad, Pen. But I will be translating his information in this video.
Well, small town and rural agriculture in El Salvador is very different from American farming. In El Salvador, machinery is not used. Mainly, this is because a lot of people can't afford any machines. Farming is done by hand, or they use animals such as oxes and cows. They use dry cow manure to fertilize the land and ox to break the ground. So what will happen is it's kind of like a big rake type that's going to be attached to the cow or the ox. And the farmer will guide the ox and kind of push it so that rake can start breaking the ground and the cow will start moving forward. After this, seeds will be planted or anything that farmers want to do. El Salvadoran terrain is mainly composed of mountains and big hills. Many of the farmers wake up very early and walk sometimes miles to get to their piece of land. This is not a very easy task because many of them bring animals or small children with them. Education is not required in El Salvador, and some parents cannot afford to send their children to school, so instead they send them to the fields to help support for the families.
A major agricultural practice in the meat and dairy industry is to allow livestock to graze. This involves allowing animals to freely roam a constricted area where they can eat grass and any other vegetation in the area. This is in stark contrast to limiting livestock to a very constricted barn, which is the most common practice in the United States. The main reason for grazing animals is that the risk of illness dramatically decreases. Farmers are able to reduce their cost on feed if they own the land, and more consumers in the United States are willing to pay a premium for grass-fed or pasture-raised livestock.
The most common agricultural practice in Vietnam is rice production. Usually this practice is done along the Mekong Delta and is primarily involving the planting of seeds that grow the rice in a water-filled field. Other practices are growing vegetables, raising poultry and pigs, and harvesting aquaculture like fish and shrimp.
Well, like I said before, my knowledge is very narrow in the city, but I'm sure the closer you get to San Salvador, there's more deforestation that happens there, but I'm not aware of how that happens. But I am aware of some of the practices that have affected some areas. For example, because of the mountainous terrain and the lack of machines, it is hard to max the supply of crops. So you can't make such a large quantity of crops because everything is done by hand. When it rains, all of the pesticides and chemicals that they have used on land will usually wash into the nearest river because there are many rivers that that are in El Salvador, and they usually run into the ocean. So that could have a major problem for ocean and fish and all those things. The major crops that are grown in El Salvador are coffee, cotton, sugarcane, and corn. I know the crops that my grandma and grandpa did were sugarcane and corn. Now my uncles still do the same thing. Coffee is done more in the city area, but that has also declined and sugarcane is taken over. So that's not such a large crop that El Salvador does anymore.
A major environmental threat from animal grazing is soil erosion. Often, especially if farmers don't closely monitor how long animals are allowed to graze the land, a lot of the vegetation is lost and the soil in the area becomes too loose and there's no root systems to keep the soil intact. With the wind and rain, along with increased pressure from the animals walking in the area, a lot of the topsoil can be lost.
In Vietnam, they use a lot of fertilizers to help the plants grow, but many of the chemicals are now seeping into the environment, which are killing the animals and plants nearby. This is not only polluting the water, but could kill the surrounding ecological system.
Well, yes, there are many concerns that I have. For example, this past year, I went back to El Salvador to visit my family. To my surprise, I found out that mining was becoming increasingly popular around the area. A Canadian mining company was buying land from farmers who had gold on their terrain, including my great uncle's land. And this Canadian mining company recruited or lured El Salvadorians to work for them, promising them that they would get greens. Many entered with dreams of providing for their families and getting out of poverty. Their high expectations were soon crushed or banished once they found out that they were getting underpaid and that the waters were being polluted. Now, people all over El Salvador were striking. I saw some banners and things like that were happening there. In El Salvador, currently, there's less than 37% of the water is drinkable. I know, for example, when we were in a town, because my mom owns a house there in town, there was very limited water. There was about 2 months that running water was not coming to the house, so we had to frequently purchase the water, which is very hard for some Salvadorians because a lot of them are very poor and they don't have money to be purchasing their water. So either they will move to the rural area or they will try to survive in town with water scarcity. And many of them can't afford to go to the local grocery store or the market to buy some water for their family to drink. So they'll just drink from the water that they purchase to bathe themselves or wash their dishes, which is not very good because there are certain viruses that are going on right now. So it's a hard topic and it's a very hard environment to live in sometimes. So the rivers from this mining, like I was saying, the rivers are carrying polluted water. They're carrying minerals, all those things. Mining is a big problem there currently right now, or in Central America, I should say. So I am concerned about the environmental effects that mining will have in a Salvadorian agriculture.
The high level of meat and dairy consumption in both the developed and developing countries is a major cause for environmental concern. And consumers often don't realize the impact of their consumption. When taking into account all of the chemicals, water, and gasoline that is used to produce the large quantity of feed that is used to produce like a single pound of beef, it's really hard to justify the environmental impacts over simple consumer preferences. And despite the ecological impact of meat and dairy consumption continues to rise throughout the world.
Practices that are extremely concerning include eradicating the mangroves in coastal swamps to raise more shrimp, because by doing this, more salt will infiltrate this fresh water, minimizing the amount of drinkable water even more. Another problem is deforestation is occurring more often for farmland and luxury spaces like golf courses as a way to generate more economic revenue for the country.